Right, hello everyone. Welcome back to a bonus D3D4 football podcast, where I am delighted to be joined by owners of Tranmere Rovers, Mark and Nicola Palios. Brilliant ownership. I've really engaged with the fans. I follow you guys very closely on Twitter and what you're doing with Tranmere Rovers. Before we get started, I will just say this podcast is in partnership with The Big Step. There is an excessive amount of gambling advertising in football, and The Big Step do great work highlighting the dangers and damage it does to people's lives. You can follow them at _big step on Twitter and take a look at the great work they do. Guys, right, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for giving up your time today. The reason I wanted to speak to you is because, I've always been interested in how you guys run Tranmere Rovers. I think you're doing a superb job. We were briefly discussing before we started recording that there's a lot of owners who aren't doing quite so well. And it's always been a frustration to me that fans don't always appreciate owners that are good until they've had a bad owner. How are you finding, you're 8 years now into the job at Tranmere. How have you found it in general? Is it harder than you thought? Is it getting harder? Just give us your thoughts on it to start us off.
Well, I'll start. I mean, to be quite honest, I spent my life walking into businesses that were in trouble. So, as a consequence, I did sort of came into this with my eyes open fully in terms of all the things that you've got to do when you're running a football business. Understanding that what we do in terms of off the park developments is not really of that much interest. When I was at the FA, the stuff that we did in the short time I was there was actually quite stunning off the pitch in terms of fixing the financial problems and so forth and so on. And I always remember that the comms guy came to me and said, okay, Mark, what are we going to say? You've been in the job sort of just about a year and what we've done. And I listed all the things that we've done, changing this and that and the other, changing the disciplinary system, actually getting Wembley built and refinanced, all that kind of stuff. And he looked at me and said, well, actually, nobody's going to be interested in that. And actually, they were more interested in what Sven was going to do. And so everybody focuses to that as the end product. And what you've got to achieve is a balance, keeping the on-field activity going. So we've managed to sort of just about keep what I would think is, we had 4 trips to Wembley. We've had back-to-back promotions, despite the relegation, which when we first started, we were demoted in the pandemic, which I won't touch on. So actually on the field, we've done relatively well and kept the fans interested. And for me, defining success in the lower leagues, and this is quite important, is understanding that if you look, absent structural change in the industry, if you look at lower league clubs, you probably have, if you define success as getting promoted, you probably have about 4 chances to be successful every season, which is to get promoted out of League 2 into League 1, and then it ends. So for me as an owner, success is defined by having something positive to play for at the end of every season, towards the end of every season. So you're not in, and with the playoffs, that makes it a lot easier, but actually that is massively important. Now, in the meantime, we'll do a lot of things behind the scenes. I mean, people have no understanding of what we're trying to do, and neither should they, to achieve that balance and make sure that since we've been here, as an accountant, what I've been doing, I don't want to bore you, but I've been changing the balance sheet and moving it from debt. So we're getting rid of debt and we're increasing the number of assets. So we're trying to change the business plan, which means that we will produce more income producing assets, like a 3G pitch is a classic example, that are agnostic as regards football performance. So, and that's not of interest to the fans, but it's massively of interest to the future of the club. And so having that debate is quite difficult. And so, I don't really get involved in Twitter and everything else trying to have a financial debate, because it's just not worth it.
So no, of course.
I think Mark's spoken a bit there about sort of what we've done within the club, and what was our sort of business plan to fix the financial issues that it had. But I mean, there have been a few things that have happened outside our control that have massively impacted on it. We certainly didn't have a COVID pandemic in our business plan, so that's really put us sort of 2 years behind schedule, because you're sort of just treading water for 2 years. We had a pitch collapse, all the drainage under the pitch, so that had to be completely redone, which was a big investment that we hadn't really been expecting to do. And I think also, if you look at the economic dynamics of the EFL since we came in 8 years ago and where they are now, it was relatively straightforward in the past to see a sort of organic growth pathway from League Two to League One to the Championship. And then, once you're in the Championship, you're in with a shout of reaching the promised land of the Premier League. That gap has widened enormously in the last 8 years. And if you look at the wages that you would need to be able to pay now to compete effectively in the Championship, it's a much bigger gap than it was when we first arrived.
I think just to qualify that, sorry, James, I think the conditions, this has been the whole thing on I'm doing something I'm going to send to the DCMS on this. The whole thing has been the march of mammon over many years in the game. As a consequence, we're looking at the end product of that. And you go back to the abolition of the maximum wage, the fact that you could then take stuff out of the clubs, the fact that you actually stop sharing gates, all leads to this gradual increase in the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. The gaps in the league and in the pyramid have existed for quite some time, but even in the short time we've been here, they've probably increased yet again. The problem with the game and the structures that they have is that they always sell the long term for the short term gain, and that's why it's been possible for the Premier League to bankroll basically what we've got now in terms of the system we've got. Sorry, I'm just stepping back from that into a broader context. But where we are and what we're trying to do is to recognise that we're in that system, and if you're in that system, you can't individually change it, and therefore you just have to look at the atom of it, the club itself. And so what we're trying to do is to change the model so that we increase the assets that produce revenues for the club. But at the same time, you've got to balance that against the ambition of the fans. And it's a conversation you can never win as an owner, because they'll say yes, but. And I think for me, the most frustrating thing is the ill-informed debate. I'm getting told by people who've never been in a dressing room that the manager's lost the dressing room on social media. Social media is the biggest difficulty if you look at it, and I personally don't engage in it. Nicky,
I blame Football Manager. It made everyone think they're a football manager now, hasn't it?
Yeah, but and they're telling me that the manager's lost the dressing room. Well, how many professional dressing rooms have there been in? I spent 17 years in professional dressing rooms. I actually had the first England players strike, and I've got people telling me that the manager's lost the dressing room, and so forth. And then people are telling me that we're bust. Well, I wrote the strategy for Coopers and Lyman, the largest insolvency practice on the planet, and I have to take that. When I say take it, I just ignore it. But that's the biggest frustration. But you just know that at the end of the day, apathy would kill us, and everybody's entitled to an opinion. The fact of the matter is that social media gives a platform to people who are ill-informed, and that's the difficulty. But the counter to that is we know that the majority of fans are real fans, and whilst they may not understand everything that we do, they're massively supportive. And one of the big things we did when we first came in, I was at the FA, and I saw all the clubs fighting with their trust, fighting with the local councils, etc. And we've developed a very good relationship with our trust, who literally do. It's just common sense. They give us advice as regards season ticket pricing and things like this. They give us advice and proper feedback as regards the fans. And to counter the fact that the trust, and probably the trust is the same at most clubs, it's quite a thin sliver of that population that come in every week. We set up an official supporters club, but we understand that official supporters club cannot be a creature of the club, and it has to have its own independence. And yet again, they feed into things. So, massively important in terms of keeping that connection with the fans, but actually quite sensible.
Yeah, I mean, supporters probably don't always get like the difficulties that you are going to be facing. Now, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but what I was thinking yesterday when I was going to talk to you is we're currently in a cost of living crisis where people are getting poorer, but you're running a football club, and I would imagine, I don't have any figures because I wouldn't know how to find them, but your utilities bills, for example, in this coming season? I mean, just off the top of my head, I would assume they've gone up by maybe high five, maybe six figures, because you're running a football club that has water, electric, heating, the works, and training ground stuff. I mean, what is that doing to your ability? And not to mention like the petrol just to travel for away teams and stuff.
I mean, it impacts everything from the staff wages to the utilities bills to the cost of the food that we're buying in for the catering and hospitality. It's you really are seeing it absolutely everywhere at the moment. You buy fertilizer for the pitch and I think fundamentally, even if there's not an issue with the underlying product, the transport costs for everybody and the, of getting stuff from A to B it is going to have a significant impact on margins for everybody. I think businesses are struggling to absorb the price increases in the same way as everybody is at home, and it's picking that balance between trying to protect the business, but also not pricing people out of being able to afford things. We're not in a wealthy area here. We've got some of the most deprived communities in the country amongst our supporter base, and it's a really hard balance to try and get right, which is why one of the things that I think has been really successful here is the way that supporters and our commercial partners who can afford it have sort of rallied around in many ways those who can't. So the community ticket scheme, I think, has been a great example of that, where a lot of people, when they've bought their own season tickets, have actually also chipped in for season tickets for us to distribute to people who are in very difficult.
Am I right thinking that you as a club are going to match the 1-to-1 the offer? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is really commendable as well.
I'll just make a point on that, just in terms of just to give us some relativity on the inflation issue. We again consulting with we kept our tickets fairly low over a period of time, and I think that when we did a sort of a read across to the equivalent tickets, we were second to bottom of the League Two in terms of cost, and there was various other there's various other metrics that showed that we hadn't changed for many years. Now, we had put them up when we went down into the non-league, surprisingly, because it was quite clear that we the previous they'd made the mistakes in terms of how they priced it. The price increase that the benefit that we would get from our season tickets would just about cover the increase in the minimum wage that the government put in April across the casual staff. That's all it covered. So that gives you a sense of where that's at. I think if I just come back to something that Nicky touched on, and that is that in changing the business model, one of the ideas I always had in my head when I came here was that you can use the club as a local delivery vehicle, a more efficient local delivery vehicle, because the club can do so many things. So I spoke on the EFL community conference, and I think people just looked at me and thought, well, we understand that, you can do this and that. But actually, we do our community stuff for a variety of reasons. We treat it as a business because if we've got these assets around that would not be used during the week, if we increase the size of the community footprint, and through the SLA, they pay 80% of the market rate, so I can rent out those buildings to them. I get 80% of something rather than 100% of nothing. At one level, that's what the community stuff does. But more importantly, it gives lower league clubs a sense of pride in their club. And actually, if you're looking at the club, if you only got 4 chances of promotion in League One and League Two, there's not many reasons to be cheerful, as it were, every season. But you increase that pride in the club. You use it as an unorthodox vehicle. So alternative provision kids will come to us when they won't go to school. And actually, we can attract what I call latent goodwill in our community, but also in our corporates from CSR to contribute monies into things. So we can do things that the local council can't do, and we can do it more efficiently, we can move quickly, and so forth and so on. As a consequence of that, we build up a great relationship with the council, which is what we've done. And again, clubs always used to fight with the councils, in my experience, or what I saw at the FA. Here we have a great partnership with the council, and that's why, you know, they've helped to fund the 3G pitch, which we've now got in place at the training ground. They've given us a grant which we have to match fund to improve our recreation centre, where we deliver a lot of the community stuff. They're about to fund the feasibility study for a new stadium together with the Environment Authority. So these are the types of benefits that you can get if you look at your community responsibilities and turn those community responsibilities into a business. And actually, it is a very sort of powerful element of the brand of the club that is getting used. And this is viewed as what I think everybody, if you look at your clubs, they can become anchor institutions in the community. And if they're used in that way, in a slightly different way to, I think, people just getting £200,000 worth of grants in, £200,000 worth of, you know, good works, you can actually change that into a real asset for the club.
Absolutely, and I think it's very important that people understand how much community work clubs do. I watch, you know, your guys giving out meals when people were starving in tough times. It's just so commendable. It really is. It's great to see. I mean, turning attention to matters on the pitch, I often hear managers talk about their budgets in relation to a sort of imaginary league table compared to other teams. Now, you often see, oh, we've got a bottom six budget in this division. Oh, we've got top. Steve Evans will tell you he's got the worst budget no matter what team he's managing, and that's maybe part of his strategy. But do you guys all chairmen have like a WhatsApp group where you discuss like who's got the biggest budget this season, or is it kind of you have to estimate it from what you see coming in from the market? You know, like how
you
much
have to estimate it, because I think every club does it in a slightly different way. If you ask them the figure of what is your player budget, it's like, well, what are you including in that? Are you including your playing staff in that figure? Are you including bonuses, or is that base salaries? Are you putting your NI in there, your accommodation costs? Like, you know, and it makes a big difference. So I mean, we get some information from the EFL, but because of that sort of lack of clarity around how people are accounting for things, at the end of the day, it's an estimate.
Yeah, I mean, you get market intelligence. You know who's out there buying players and the prices that they're paying. You know, for example, in the middle of COVID, when they brought in a wage cap, which I thought was essential, there were several clubs that immediately tried to beat the time limit on that. So suddenly players you were talking to were getting twice the wages that you were offering them. So you do get a sense from the market. You do look at the benchmark figures that Nicky's talked about. What we do here is I have it's actually quite a sophisticated model now, and we've always managed to direct that. But what we have been doing, again, behind the scenes, and you can't really sort of explain that to people, we scrapped our academy because it doesn't work for us, and I can bore you for hours on that one, why it doesn't work.
Just on the academy, I assume the big thing about it is that you can have a young player in your academy from, say, I don't know, say he's a young kid, you have him there for a decade maybe, and then, you know, if he shows good potential, he can be pinched for next to nothing by a bigger club. So what's the point?
Absolutely. But if you actually look at it, I've done some stuff on what I call the football processes. We're about to launch a diploma in professional football studies with Liverpool University. And it's an international thing. So, I mean, but on that, I'll talk about football processes. And the principal processes for me are recruitment, development, and then management. By management, I don't just mean the manager. I mean, it's all the resource that's put into that, sports science and so forth and so on. But if you just look at the recruitment side to it and the development side, we were a Cat 3 academy. So, you know, we've got Liverpool, Everton, Man United, Man City in close proximity to us, within 25, 30 miles. So as a Cat 3 academy, there's a filter at the front end, and that's the parents and the kids themselves probably. So aged 8, we get probably third rate coming into our academy here. And as you say, so you get third rate in. We're actually putting into those kids probably 2 nights a week throughout those 8 to 10 years. Cat 1 academy is putting in maybe 5 nights or a lot more input into those kids. And if we have a gem, as you say, they can be nicked. So what comes out, and they play in a games program, in a Cat 1 games program, they play against Cat 1 clubs, and we play against Cat 3 clubs. So if you look at that, and this is the most short-term industry, and I've looked at loads that I've ever seen, why would we invest for 10 years in a kid or a group of kids, not one, because only, you know, you've got to have a team, right the way through? You get some kind of supplemental contribution from the league, and this is the EPPP system, which, going back to what I said before, all the clubs sold out the long term for the short term. So for us, it doesn't work. It may work for somebody like Exeter because geographically it suits them. So we get third-rate product coming out at the end of our system, and we get rated very highly because we sign players on pro contracts, but they've never got a chance of playing in the first team. Now, we've signed a player called O'Connor, goes into Man United's academy, Cat 1, goes right the way through that, goes to Celtic, another great academy, comes to us on loan, and we then try before you buy. You see him, we like him, so we take him on board as a player that we can develop and give Celtic a sell on. We don't take the risk for 10 years investing in a kid or 12 years investing in somebody. And actually, if you then look at what's changed over the years, if you look at the demographic of Liverpool Football Club, it doesn't match the demographic of Liverpool. You know, they're shopping in the jungles of Borneo and stuff like that. So where are those kids going? So for me, it's a much more efficient way. And you're starting to see the first season now. We had a few last year. You're starting to see the difference now. So, you know, I'm not writing off the kids on Merseyside, but to be quite honest, in the days gone by, the players that we brought through were the mistakes that Liverpool and Everton made on players aged about 14 or 15. And they used to kick them out of the academies. Now they've got so much money, they can keep them, and they can hoover, they can go wider than they ever could do. So, you know, you really don't have a chance against that. And I just think it's not sensible to stay in the system. So that's why we left it.
No, I get that. I think that's quite a sensible decision. I think other teams have done that before. Obviously, biggest thing that fans will be interested in at this time of year is recruitment. You've made some really good signings. It's rumoured that there's a couple more on the way. So in terms of recruitment, I would imagine you run it as a it's not like a manager just choosing the players. It's a group thing. You have a recruitment team. How big are you now on data and analysis in that respect? Because that's been a massive improvement at clubs, especially down this level of the football pyramid, which has really sort of taken off since we've been doing D3D4 football, actually.
Yeah, no, the data is important, and people think because I'm an accountant, you'd like the data. But what I say is data is interesting, but it's got to be influential. And when we looked at the data originally, people said, well, you know, this is for recruitment. Well, I think you've got to reverse engineer it. You've got to take it into that football processes. You've got to take it into management first. Decide how you want to be playing. And I say decide how you want to be playing. I'm not being, you know, we're definitely going to play this way, etc. But what you can do. But for example, if your budget is of a certain size, you may decide that you don't want to take wingers on board because wingers are fairly, they can play one position. You know, you can't mix them around the way that you play. So I think you then, once you've got it in there and once you understand the way you want to play, I come back to developing players. I think, you know, management, to be quite honest, is about 10% of the value in the value chain. It may be minus 20%. I don't mean the manager. I mean that whole area there. Development's about 20% and recruitment's 70% of the value. So you know, we've got data that's come in and we filter that back down that chain and we decide on the types of players that we want to fit the way that we want. And that is massive for us. And we've found that very useful in terms of targeting. But you've got to have the whole system. You can't just have the data. And as I say, I hate it when people just have the data and it's interesting, but it's not influential.
No, of course, no. And I think that's something that we've seen a lot of people grasp, actually, when it comes to recruitment. I mean, you're going to be in a League Two this year with, there's going to be some pretty big hitters. I mean, the interesting one for me is the ownership model at Crawley. I'm going to keep a close eye on how that works. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of NFTs, maybe because I don't understand them. In all honesty, the whole cryptocurrency stuff in football.
Yeah, I mean, we've just been doing an interesting piece of work actually with one of the interns from Liverpool University, looking specifically at the NFT space. And although that hasn't quite finished yet, I have to say, I think the conclusion is it's almost impossible to find one that has worked. I mean, if you look at, even the mighty Liverpool Football Club with their enormous, fan base all over the world, I think they sold something like 6% of the NFTs that they launched, and they're all, or nearly all, desperately underwater in terms of the values plummeted since. So it's like, if at that level,
I have, as a fan as myself, and I'm getting on a bit, right? But I have no interest in that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't know if some of the guys that host the podcast with me, they're a decade or so younger than me, so they've grown up differently in terms of the football product. But I just don't have any interest.
I'm sure things are going to evolve, and there will be things eventually in that space that emerge that do work. But at the moment, I think it's the Wild West in terms of you've got businesses with very little substance behind them, and some of them seem to operate almost as a bit of a Ponzi scheme in terms of there's been a bit of an
football index thing, didn't we, which was just tragic.
So for us, I think it's difficult at the moment, but what we are trying to do is some proper thought through research on what is it that makes them so inherently risky. Is there any way that you could do something that delivered genuine tangible value as opposed to some sort of hypothetical digital but at the moment I think it's if you're a really sort of sophisticated investor, high net worth investor, and you can afford to have a punt on something which is going to be incredibly volatile, then fill your boots, and who knows, you might get lucky and get something that's incredibly valuable. But I think the reality is that it's not something that we would want to be pushing to.
My concern would be massively that someone, you say fill your boots, someone does that, but unless they have the capital to protect the club should something go wrong, that's my big concern. You could have another massive insolvency problem in a club, which, like you've just been saying, hub of the community.
I think it depends on what you're looking at. I think, if what you're doing is selling NFTs, then being blunt about it, once the thing is sold, the problem's gone from the club's perspective. It's the person who owns it who will then get into trouble. But I think the whole, where you take it a whole level further to, you've got cryptocurrency and NFTs giving ownership of the clubs, then I think you've got a massive potential issue. And crypto is so volatile. To me, I don't know how you can do a cash flow for a business that is based on
the answer is you can, but you wouldn't be able to bank it. Look, there are two separate issues as you were touching on. One is the club, and one is actually selling it off to the supporter. And once you've sold it, you've sold it. And I come back to we've been careful to try and build the brand of the club, and it's not just for the sake of building the brand, because we genuinely believe it's a good business thing to do, but equally it has the great byproduct of actually being great for your community as well. We've also said that we have one of the poorest communities in the UK around us, and the last thing we want to do is to sell them a pup. We're not just after their cash for that. So can I just come back to something you touched on right at the start of this program, and that was the fact that the gambling companies got down in the debate with the government at this point in time. So the rumours are that they'll stop putting the gambling companies' names advertised on the front of shirts in the Premier League. They won't stop doing that. And so, to me, if you then start to look at the game, we can hardly say that we are against gambling on the front of our shirts, which we are. And I'm a clinical psychologist originally by training, and I hate gambling. Problem gambling, and I hate the way that it's taken over our game in this digital age.
Well, you're very commendable for trying to protect your supporters.
Yes. So why would we do that and then sell them NFTs, which we as business people couldn't justify?
No,
we have been approached, and we've done a lot of work on it because we were flattered to be approached, but I think people saw us as a relatively innovative club. And the people they were bona fide people. They were they're good lads. But at the end of the day, we are not convinced that that's something that we can do.
No, I mean I know we're going to run short of time, but I just want to touch upon the fact that you really do engage with your fans. You engage with them on the kit. You let your own fans design it, and it's a really nice kit, by the way, this year. You let them make a decision on the badge, and that's quite important because this week we've seen a team in the division below you change the badge, and it didn't go down well. We'll just leave it at that. That's very important, that engagement with your supporters. Is that something you've always wanted to sort of bring?
Yeah, look, I've looked at loads of businesses, loads of industries, and there is no industry that I know of whereby somebody shops age 5 and they're still buying off you age 75. And that's because they're not customers, they're fans. And I think it's a two-way street in any relationship. You've got to give, you get back what you put in. I think in terms of the fans and the engagement with the fans, it's a good part of the club. I used the phrase, and I know it's been picked up from quite a few people. I said, look, owners come and go, players come and go, managers come and go, fans are always there, and they're the only constant. So the fans actually are the club, and it's not just mealy mouthed. I said that we are the custodians of the club. But the club, actually, the entity, when you start to look at it deeply, the entity is that sort of collective goodwill from the fans. The fans are the club. We just happen to own the corporate vehicle on which it lives its life on earth. And if once you start to look at it like that, you do have to sort of listen to what they say. You do have to understand that it's for them, and you can't do that if you don't engage. I'll just tell you a little bit about the shirt decision. I was, because we went into COVID, I was trying to do a little bit of keep engagement with the fans because there was no games to watch and so forth. So I started to do some Twitter, and I was leading them astray as regards what the new kit was going to be, which was great. But I also knew in my heart of hearts it was going to be a disappointment when it came in, because we're an all-white kit, and you're given 4 opportunities from the major manufacturers like Nike and templates, and therefore there's not a lot you can do with it year on, year out. And but I also knew, because of our Indonesian investment, we potentially were going to get an Indonesian manufacturer who does the Indonesian national team. It's good quality. We've been out there and we'd seen it. And so I then said, I'll tell you what, you see if you can do any better. And we started the competition on that way, and that's become what it's become. And as you say, fans have got engaged in the development of the kit, and I think it's great, and we'll see what we can do. And we said that they haven't done that on the away kit, and the away kit, they'll love the away kit.
Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like. Finally, really, there's this big thing about the Biden Dock redevelopment, a possible move for Tranmere Rovers to a new stadium. They've agreed to do the feasibility study, which is absolutely superb. Obviously, Prenton Park, I know, is an aging stadium. People will absolutely love it, but I think a new stadium move, if done correctly, can be a real positive for a football club. I'm speaking as an Oxford fan. I can tell you, if it's done wrong, then it's not great. So, but if you move, you have a great potential to increase your cash flow, increase your assets, increase your finances, have stability, and you could therefore become a stable championship club, like I think is your stated ambition.
Yeah.
Where do you see this going at the moment? Because obviously a new stadium would cost, I've been reading some sources, about 55 million for the stadium, 27 million for the conferencing and hotel. How would that be funded? What are your thoughts on it at the moment? I know it's a long way off, but it's quite a big thing for a football club to sort of undertake.
Yeah. I'll just take this one, because I've been working on it night and day for quite some time, as long as doing everything else that we need. But look, the first thing is that there's nothing to see at the moment, so move on. And that is the first step in this is to get a real feasibility study. Nicky and I pulled together sort of a rudimentary business plan with research that Nicky had done in terms of other stadium moves and so forth and so on, just to say that this was a pre-feasibility study to take to the council, and having, as I said before, our good relationship with the council means that we can do this sort of thing. And they've broadened it into something that is Sports City Wirral, which you may know that there's also a big development on the south bank, which is where the Wirral is of the River Mersey. I understand, and I may be wrong on this, I keep saying it, but there are very few rivers in the world that go through a major city, if any, that are not developed on both sides. But the Wirral isn't really developed on this side, so you'd be looking at massive development. The Wirral Waters development, which is what it is a major part of it, is stalled. This is seen as a catalyst for that. And not only that, it actually uplifts, because they're adding in lots of other leisure facilities around where the new stadium would be. So the proposal is that it then sort of uplifts both the north end of Birkenhead, which is desperately in need of it, and also in Wallasey, and it gets the regeneration pump project. You do need that. If you look at Salford, you needed what happened at Salford to make it work. So it is that there is that side to it, but until we've had the feasibility study, there's no debate to be had. And by the time we get the feasibility study, if that says okay, it works, that's the time when you engage with the fans, because there's no point in engaging with them now, because it's not costing us anything at this point in time. We get a better informed debate when we get it. Then we go back, and so it's at that point in time. Look, people have invested a lot of their relationship with the club in that pitch and in this ground. Well, I have as well. My entire career, virtually, apart from 2.5 years at Crewe, was out on that pitch out there. So I think so. I understand the history. I understand the attachment. But if I'm right in what I'm saying, and that is that absent structural change in the industry, we can't become a self-sustainable championship club without some sea change in what we do, which is right. Well, is that sea change going to come from a new stadium move? Well, the indications are that it could. So whilst I appreciate that people who are like 50, 60, 70 years old say, well, all my memories are with that. Why do you preclude a kid who's born today having that opportunity in 50 years' time or 20 years' time to be in a championship club? And actually, once you're a championship club, as long as I always say you're only 6 games off the Premiership. You might have a good run, get in the playoffs, and you might have a good run in the playoffs, and you're there. So I think this is about ambition. I think if you look at the Wirral, you've got to have the ambition to have a championship club on the Wirral. We were a championship club, so you can have that. But that debate is pointless at this point in time. It takes up energy. It creates division. Let's have a proper informed debate when we get the feasibility study. Not like Brexit.
Yeah, just make sure your architect knows it needs to have 4 sides, because trust me,
four sides.
It doesn't help when you don't have it. Yeah,
and actually, the gladiatorial piece that we have at Prenton Park. Again, as a player, I know what I want, but what's important is what the fans want, and I think that's what they will want. So they will be involved in looking at the design of the thing from a fan's perspective. And we've already got the organs of the trust and trust, but actually, that's where the debate is. What do you actually want in terms of that? Because we'll have the debate on the economics, which will be better informed. And if that passes the test, then actually you can have the debate. Well, okay, what can it look like? And so they can be positively involved in the design of the stadium. Look, and as for the funding of it, I'm going to be arrogant now. I'm saying that we built Wembley when the FA was bust, and that was 850 million. So building this, and if you put a hotel in it, it could be 70 million. And I'm told that that's well, whatever. I don't even know what the design is yet, so I can't cost it. So when that comes, and I've got ideas as regards how we'll fund the capital stack, but there's no point in debating that at this point in time, because it's pointless until I've got a design stadium.
Perfect. Lastly, hopes for this current season, because actually I felt you were pretty unlucky to miss out on the playoffs last year. I think if you'd had the same points total that you got last year, the previous season you'd been 5th. So it was a really, really difficult season. I mean, Oxford, my team, I think we finished on our highest points total, yet we didn't get in the playoffs either. So it was an extraordinary and a competitive division, both League 1 and 2 last year. What are your hopes for this year in terms of obviously promotion, but how well this squad can do under Mickey's guidance?
For me, I think I think we've made some good signings.
Yeah, I agree.
It's quite young as a team, and there's a little bit of experience. It's just been injected in today and last night. I think you've always got to have patience with this, but we will, for the first time, I think, have some assets on the pitch, as people call, that you can sell. But at the end of the day, the objective always is, as I said before, is to be competitive. Right to the end of the season. And people always say to me, do you set the manager targets? No. I mean, what's the point of going out? It's fairly obvious. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I always wonder, they never say, well, I want you to finish 23rd this season. No.
When they ask the question, I feel it's like when you see somebody who's just won the FA Cup or won the league and said, how do you feel? I mean, when they ask me that question, well, not that I've won the league, but we've been promoted and stuff. When they ask you the question, you feel like saying, "Well,
how do you think?"
I'll just think, yeah,
Incredible.
desperately disappointed.
Yeah,
Just,
bit naff, really. You know.
yeah. But you know, League One and League Two fans are great, and I think that, you know, just coming back to the main point here. I used to travel the world with the FA and stuff like that, and people used to say to me, "Wow, you know, you've got the pyramid, and we have to protect the pyramid." Because it gives so much back. If you look at COVID, which was an acid test for the industry, I think the Premier League, all the institutions, the FA absent without leave, the EFL, the PFA, all of those organisations absolutely failed to deliver, to my mind, on a timely basis, any coordinated response. So the fable of the football family was there collectively. The fable of it was a failed collective response.
A lot of self-interest involved, unfortunately.
Absolutely. But if you look at the game individually, from the perspective of individual players, from the perspective of individual clubs, such as ours, we delivered 50,000 meals with partners by September of 2020. The game showed what it's really about. And that's the thing. I think it's the institutions around it that need to be knocked into shape and have the wings clipped to some extent and put back in the place that they should be. They should run competitions, and they should the EFL should run a competition, and it should monetize it. It should not, and it should look at disciplinary stuff that relates to that competition exactly. It should not be representing clubs. It can't represent clubs. On this point in time, I think it only represents about 12 to 13 clubs in the pyramid. And so, you know, who represents the clubs? Who represents the owners? Because the owners aren't the clubs. You know, there's all types of issues like this that need to be debated.
Are you in favour of the Crouch report?
Yes, I am. And my concerns on it are, I touched on something at the very start of this. The modus operandi of the Premier League, as far as I'm concerned, is to bankroll it to its own ends. The modus operandi of football is that when this happens, like the Tracy Crouch report, is to play a long game, to march it into the long grass and shoot it. Now, they've got less of a chance of that because you're going to have a regulator. But it's defining the regulator's job that's the most important thing. And that's what I'm going to write on in the near future, because I think they've got to do a number of tasks. And within that, what I don't want is, I know that from my experience of Westminster, is that the minister's inbox is about 2 years, and they lose interest. The government, I would hope, is not just what they have, is they jumped on a populist bandwagon at the time, and that's what gave it the momentum. So it was fortuitous we got to where we got to, and the important thing is to keep their feet to the fire. And I think that is all about the debate of the powers and the scope of the independent regulator going forwards. And that's certainly what I'll be pushing.
Yeah, 100% agree. And just before you go, you're an accountant, Mark. When will the Football League be able to afford professional referees in these professional divisions? Because I never understood why. I don't want VAR. I don't want VAR. I don't want anything. I just want professional standard referees in the professional league.
To be quite honest, I mean, I haven't got the facts and the figures, so as an accountant, I can't give you a proper answer on that. But what I can tell you subjectively is, we had a referee last season who, to some extent, ruined our season towards the end, and actually made allegations when he came off the pitch as to what had happened. And actually, when you pointed out to him, well, because we got CCTV and stuff like that, it was about opinion, not fact. I was spat on. No, you weren't. Some fluid was on you. Well, what we can see was a bottle of water was flicked in on you. So, when you've got referees who are doing that, who don't understand the difference between opinion and fact, and they're judged on their opinions, it just undermines your confidence in it. Having said that, I'm a great supporter of referees because they do a difficult job. Having said, I also believe that they choose to do it. And they should be supported, and they should be supported better by the FA. So things like dissent. I look at rugby, and Nicky's dad used to be the head of refereeing at the RFU, and I'm jealous of rugby in terms of the players' relationship with the referees. So it cuts both ways. I think the players have a responsibility to be professional, and to not cheat on their fellow professionals. So I was at the FA, they call it simulation. Let's call it cheating.
But
If I've gone in for a tackle and the guy's just dived, in my day that didn't happen, I have to say. And to see it now just galls me intensely. And when my own players do it, I don't like it.
I just would like to see referees made professional, because I think there's enough money in football to do it, and I think it would incentivize it better. It would be a career path for younger guys to come in and become referees, because they can see there's a career in it, and that would be improve standards dramatically.
No, I would agree with that, and we're looking at I think there's some money that's been out there through our education business to look at possibly putting on a course for people who do like a BTEC and also would get qualified as a referee and so forth and so on. But I just come back to it and saying, in defence of referees, it's a two-way street, and the game itself has to produce a context that allows them to, the best opportunity that they can have to referee a game fairly. So, the classic thing for me is, well, take out diving. I mean,
of course. I don't think there'll be any fan who would disagree with that. I don't think so. I think every fan hates diving. Really,
any true football person would say that. It's any true sporting person would say that. So I think that the game's not perfect, but it's a fantastic game. That's why you support it, we support it, and we've got supporters. And when you stand back and analyse it, it's quite strange. You actually think about it. I played at Bradford when the Sheffield was sunk at the Falklands, and it affected me. When I went out on the pitch before the game, we were kicking the ball in, and it really became, all these people there to watch us kicking the ball. Some lads had died down in the Falklands, and it just really put it into perspective. But having said that, you then look at what other organisation on the world gives so much enjoyment when you see a goal scored, and at the end of season dinner, I was watching the absolute exhilaration on the fans' faces, and
they call it limbs now. Apparently, that's gone over my head.
But how many organisations in your community do that week in and week out? There's nothing.
No,
it's fantastic.
Well, Mark, Nicola, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I really appreciate your time. I've taken up far too much than I really should have, but always appreciate talking to you guys. And good luck this season. Really hope you do well.
Thanks, James, and good luck to you as well.
Thank you.